Hello Call of Duty fans, welcome back. We've got CWL Anaheim power rankings ready to go for you. And well, it's going to shake things up because there's a little bit of confusion as far as how I want to set this up, because at a certain point this needs to formulate as a predictions kind of tab for Anaheim, but at the same point it also needs to kind of list out how the teams have performed up until this point and where I see them based off of their divisional play. So it's kind of a hard battle to kind of determine if you're just going to do purely off of that or speculation of how does this team play on land. I did a little bit of both in the mix. So let's go ahead and just dig things in. Again, starting at the very bottom, working our way up. You guys are going to be, I think, a little bit conversational about these picks. Let's start at the bottom, like I mentioned. 16th spot, I've got UYU at the very bottom. Flat out, I mean, again, this team, it's weird because the Zap change is going well or going okay for them. Obviously, having beat Genji and LG was the only two teams they beat in the Division A split, but it's just strange because Proto, and even before that, you also had Spoof in the mix with this team, and the SOG pressure and the upfront gunfights just haven't really been going any way in favor of UYU. So when you take a look at this team based on their performances, obviously in the regular season and before that, it hasn't been very good, but then you take a look at their pool, and it doesn't really favor them all that much either, I don't think. Their pool is E United, Team Reciprocity, and Elevate, all of that happening in B. And honestly, I would be surprised to see this team win more than maybe a game, and that might just be versus Elevate or maybe Reciprocity if they come out cold. But generally speaking, my expectations for this team at Anaheim are not very high. That's why I have them in the 16th spot going forward. And now, beyond that, in the 15th spot, honestly, I wanted to put Luminosity higher than this simply because I think Formal with practice automatics and then just throwing Ricky onto an ICR will actually make this team probably a top 12 squad, but I have them down here again simply because of how they performed. You can't only win 4 maps in your division and be rated too highly, because it's just hard to really base the judgment for them to go that much further. Beyond that, you take a look at their pool, they'll be in D with Team Envy, struggling but good, typically, or sometimes are on land. Genji struggled but have finished relatively well in the previous CWL events, and then 100 Thieves. So again, I don't see Luminosity making it out of this pool, so it would have to be a repeat of London where they start to put together a little bit of a loser's bracket run, which honestly, it just depends on who they get put up against. They very well could win their first loser's bracket game and be a top 12 team immediately just because of that, and that might be the only game they win. So it's just weird to see that being the case as far as how to rate this team. Personally though, I see them losing more often than winning, and even against teams that are basically just around the same area as them, I think they would have a hard time with them based on what we saw previously. Again, it's all speculation of what will happen when Ricky and Formal get some time together, obviously playing on different roles. But beyond that, you take a look at that pool in specific, and I just don't see Slack being able to hang up with the likes of a Havoc or an Envoy or a Priesta or even a Huke or a Decimate. So it's just too hard to judge this team to really push them too much further up, even though I think they'll probably finish top 12 because I don't see them not winning a single game. And I see them winning their first losers bracket game. So it's just kind of tough to make that prediction happen. 14th spot, I've got Midnight slipping 2 slots, and it's hard to really put a finger on what's going on with this team because in their first week of the Division A, they looked good. I mean, they played a game 5 all the way versus UYU, which at that point in time we were like, all right, maybe UYU is actually a little bit better. And then they beat LG 3-0, and we were like, damn, that's really good. But then they followed up their second week by going 1-3, 0-3, 0-3, and 1-3 versus EG, Reciprocity, Optic, and FaZe respectively. Midnight will be in a very weird spot as well, as they'll be sitting in Pool C, where they have Enigma 6, who I think will shock some teams in that pool, and Splice, who look better, and FaZe Clan, who's probably a top 4 team. So again, I don't see this Midnight team getting out and into the winners bracket, so it means it just comes down to who they play in the losers bracket if they finish top 16 or top 12. I don't see them going beyond top 12 though. In the 13th spot, I have Enigma 6, and again, I was relatively impressed with this team. Would have loved to have seen them beat Denial 3-1 or so, because they went game 5 with 100 Thieves, they went game 5 with EU, they played a close set versus Splice, and they were able to take down Heretics and Envy. So beyond the 3-0 loss that they had versus Splice and the kind of shocking losses they had versus Elevate and Denial, this is one of the few teams that's been able to take the top, or at least top 4, top 5 teams to game 5, if not beat them. Now, they have not gone well as far as being able to beat those teams, but they have taken them to map 5 routinely. So for this team, I'm actually looking for them to play spoilers a lot. They've got FaZe Clan, Splice, and Midnight, like I mentioned, in their pool. And honestly, again, I see this team possibly finishing top 12. It just comes down to, will they be that big of a surprise in Pool C and take 2 matches there? I think they could, which would put them in the winner's bracket. And then you're definitely dealing with the top 12 team. But there's also the possibility that they could just strike out versus Splice and FaZe Clan, maybe only beat Midnight. That's not a guarantee by any stretch. So they very well could be in the loser's bracket as well. It's just kind of hard to predict what this team's going to do. I think that this is a team that can definitely go top 12, if not potentially top 8, if they're able to put together a good Sunday. Let's go on further a little bit up to number 12, where I have Denial bumped up 2 more spots, mostly due to the fact that, again, they were able to take Heretics to 5. They're able to beat Splice 3-1, beat Envy at the beginning of the week, which is relatively impressive. They took a map off 100 Thieves, but again, they were also able to beat E6, which is the real reason why I have them above Enigma 6, is simply that they were able to beat them. It would be too hard pressed for me to not put them above Enigma 6, considering they had similar win-loss ratios over the last 2 weeks, and the fact that they won the head-to-head. Now, the bad news here for Denial is that they're in a pool where I don't see them personally winning a game. They've got Evil Geniuses, Heretics, and Optic. And again, the head-to-head here is not very great. They've only beat Heretics once. Yes, they took them to Game 5, but beyond that, I just don't see them doing all that well versus Evil Geniuses or Optic. So again, this is a team that I don't know if they'll finish top 12. I have them in the losers bracket. Again, just comes down to who do they play up against, and can they find a way to win. In the 11th spot, our biggest drop from week 13 here to week 14, Team Envy, and I think it's kind of hard to deny it. They only had a 3-1 win versus Heretics. They lost everywhere else, including Game 5 losses to Denial and Elevate, where once again, in Game 5, they weren't able to put away any of those round 11s, which is something we keep talking about. In round 11s in the last 2 weeks, they have lost all 3 that have gone the distance. They are our worst map 5, worst round 11 team, and with that performance they had with the 1-3 loss to Splice, the 0-3 loss to Enigma 6, and then not being able to close out Elevate, my expectations for this team are a little bit all over the place. Again, they're in a pool that's not going to be easy. 100 Thieves, Genji, and Luminosity. They very well might not win a game in that pool based on what we saw them looking like in the last 2 weeks. However, I see them winning at least 1 game. It just comes down to versus who. I, again, don't see this team, though, getting into the winner's bracket, so I have them finishing top 12 with them being able to win at least 1 loser's bracket game. Again, remember, at London, they put together that absolutely special loser's bracket run to get them top 4, which is really, again, was unexpected and why we had them boosted so high. In my 10th spot, going a little bit higher up, is Elevate. This is actually where they were before. Again, with the Game 5s all across the board in their second week of Division B, the 3-2 win versus Envy, but losses to E United and Heretics. And then after that 3-0 week, we were saying, well, this week too is going to be very difficult for them, and they're going to have to prove themselves. I think they show that this team is absolutely a contender. It just comes down to, will they be able to beat those teams that are just narrowly above them? They did have a 3-2 win versus Splice. We haven't seen their name on the list yet, but they do have 3-1 wins versus Denial and a 3-2 win versus Enigma 6. I think 10 is a very appropriate spot for them. This team very well could finish above top 12. It just comes down to what they're able to do against a team like Reciprocity and UYU in their pool. They also have E United there, where they have not looked super great versus them. Yes, they took them to 5, which was great, but beyond that and before that, this roster that was previously mostly a red reserve has also not looked super great versus that E United team. So it's just a lot of things to kind of look at and consider as far as, will they be able to match up against a major contender if they meet up against them earlier on in the tournament than they might like to. So that's why I had them in the 10th spot. In the 9th spot, a little bit higher up, and I said it, I was impressed by the way that this team in Splice looked with their recent additions coming in. So when you take a look at Splice, as they'll be sitting here and they'll be playing in, in Pool C, I'm very interested to see what they're going to be able to offer, especially since the fact that Nolson has been called up. Again, being called up from the sub spot where he was previously playing with Kairos, who finished in the top side of the London Open bracket. They finished 2nd there. He's been looking really solid with this Splice team, so I'm excited to see what they're going to be able to do. Yes, they did well the first 2 days, 2 3-1 wins versus Envy and Heretics since Nolson was brought on, but is that going to be the instant remedy for this team? I don't necessarily think so. Again, they're in a pool where they're going to really have to prove themselves because they cannot drop games versus Midnight or Enigma 6, and you would love to see them go up against FaZe in a very close matchup. I just don't know if that's going to happen. They did 3 3-0 that E6 team, remember, but it was very close. Even though it was a 3-0, each of the 3 maps were very, very close. So a lot of things to consider for Splice. I'm still excited to see them play, and I think that they'll probably do well, but I don't know if I can necessarily say they'll be a top 8 team so quickly after just adding in Nulson. Getting into our top 8, I have Genji up in here, and again, a lot of people are concerned about Genji and what they have been able to do or what they've not been able to do in recent memory, with obviously dropping the reverse sweeps a couple of different times and not having the greatest divisional of A, where they only won 2 games. It was a 3-0 versus Midnight and a 3-1 versus Luminosity. That's it. Those are the 2 worst teams in Division A that they were able to beat. They lost a Game 5 versus UIU. They lost a Game 5 versus Reciprocity. And they lost a Game 5 versus Optic. And they were 3-0'd by Evil Geniuses. So this team a little bit all over the place. But even still, I think you need to keep in mind that this is a good team. You got to figure they're going to clean things up. They had a perfect pools back at London. They had a very good, actually they had a perfect pools at Fort Worth as well. So this team, when it comes to major events, has looked very good. It just comes down to, will they find that same kind of magic and actually put together a run where they could potentially finish top 4? I don't know, because I think the competition for the top 4 is very steep, and based on what we saw versus those top teams and even not top teams for Genji in Division A, you can't really sit there and think that you have the utmost confidence of them to even get out of the pool in the winner's bracket, let alone make a run, because again, 100 Thieves, Team Envy, and Luminosity are in that bracket, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Evil Geniuses will be in my 7th spot. Again, they did not finish off their second week great. They started with a 3-1 and then lost 0-3 and then 2 Game 5 losses. That was to Optic with the 3-0. FaZe Clan 5, Reciprocity in 5. So again, teams that are just above them, they're able to come close. It just comes down to how much polish has Revan been able to get this team going, and will they find that last bit of magic to close things out? Because again, those search losses were also pretty close in those Game 5s. It was a 3-6 loss and a 4-6 loss, the 3-6 versus Reciprocity, the 4-6 versus FaZe. But again, you're hoping that that all gets cleaned up. It's their search and destroy that by far was their weakest. They looked much better when it came to their control, at least on Arsenal, which is where they got all of their wins, 4 of them at 3-0s, by the way. But in Respawn, they continue to look strong. So I'm excited to see how this team has really progressed. Again, to remind you of their pool, they'll be in Pool A with Optic, Heretics, and Denial. Definitely potential for them to finish in the winner's side of that bracket, and then also make a push for potentially top 8, depending on how they're able to put together what will likely eventually be a loser's bracket run at some point in time, hopefully later rather than sooner. In my 6th spot, everyone keeps sleeping on the Heretics. I'm seeing predictions out here saying that they don't even have Heretics in their top 8. They haven't finished outside the top 8 at a major event yet. I don't understand how people are still sleeping on this team. Yes, they had a bad pools at Fort Worth that really, I think, put a bad taste in people's mouths when it came to this team on LAN, but then they went 3-0 in a week pooled, granted, at London before they were able to beat Splice, and then they got a little bit beat up by Optic and E United, but both those teams, as we know, were playing on fire that day of the bracket on Saturday going into Sunday. So for this team, they have a 2-5 record after the divisional split. Not great, but they're in a pool that I think they'll do relatively well against. Again, Evil Geniuses and Denial. We've seen them play up against Denial. It went in Game 5 the first time. I don't think it'll go Game 5 again. I think there were some mistakes that Heretics did previously that really kind of kept them from securing that one in a closer fashion. I have Heretics getting into the winner's bracket personally, as long as they can take care of Evil Geniuses. We've seen them play close versus Optic in the past as well, so don't sleep on that. Although the one time they did play was actually technically an 0-3, but again, it was a relatively good set when they played each other at London, so I'm excited to see that rematch. So I have Heretics sitting in a top 6 spot. Again, I don't anticipate them falling outside the top 8. They routinely do it, so I don't know why they're continually being slept on. 5th spot, Reciprocity. Let's finish this out. It's just hard. Honestly, anybody from 16 until 5th in my power rankings could finish 16 through 5th, based on the lack of consistency we've seen and just the lack of pressure and power since the roster changes just before London. I don't know. I personally don't know. But Reciprocity, after what they looked like with Dens, I think has the best shot at finishing top 6 and maybe even making a run for a top 4 spot. They have looked good in the past when it came to major lands. Now, that is a little bit undergranted because, again, at London, they did not look nearly all that great. They went 0-3 in pools, only winning 2 maps before they were able to find 2 3-1 victories against Evil Geniuses and UIU, and then they got a little bit beat up versus E United in that loser's bracket run that was starting to be put together. For this Reciprocity team, though, again, with their pool sitting with E United, Elevate, and UIU, I have them beating Elevate and UIU. The Elevate game might be good, but honestly, I think Reciprocity is a better team. So again, I have this team going into the winner's bracket. and against other teams that will also be in their winners bracket, as I kind of anticipate, I think they could at least win 1, if not 2 games that would put them right in top 6 contention, which is why I have them up here. In my 4th spot, I've got FaZe Clan going all the way through. Again, only losing 1 set in the Division A split where they looked really, really good against Optic in 5, where they would eventually lose in 5. But 3-0 wins versus UYU, LG, and Reciprocity, and then 3-1 wins versus Genji and Midnight, and they had a Game 5 win versus Evil Geniuses. Biggest thing with this team, the search and destroy. This team was perfect in the control throughout the 2 weeks of Division A. They only dropped 2 maps in the respawn, but the amount of times that they weren't able to find wins in search and destroy are a little bit too staggering. If they can clean that up, this team very well could be a major contender come Anaheim. So definitely keep your eye on it. I have them finishing top 4. I have them getting out of their pool, where again they'll be playing up against Splice, Midnight, and E6. Now here's where the controversy goes for you guys. In my 3rd spot, I moved Optic Gaming down a touch. Now, here's my reasoning why, as I will actually go ahead and just show my top 3 as a whole, because the conversation is pretty fluid, and honestly, argumentatively, you could argue any of these teams are the best team in the game. Optic I have in 3rd, E United I have in 2nd, and I still have 100 Thieves in 1st. Now, Optic versus E United, last we saw them play, it was an 0-3 at London. And it wasn't just an 0-3, it was a little bit of a beat up. 197 to 250, 4-6, and then 1-3 as we go from hardpoint to search to control. Also in the head-to-head between these teams, it's actually a draw, 1 map or 1 match to 1 match. It was a 3-0 for Optic the first time, it was a 3-0 for United the second time. The biggest thing is this Optic Gaming team during their Division A split were playing up against really nobody with the exception of FaZe Clan, who still they had to take to 5, and they had to reverse sweep versus Genji. Now again, throw away that Genji set because Optic did not look like they were ready to play in the first 2 maps. They would come back, find their Fuego, and not have a problem with Genji the rest of the way. But the set versus FaZe was a little bit revealing. A 6-0 win on the search. I mean, their search looked better. That's the biggest thing. They only lost a single map on the search. That was actually to Genji. My biggest concern comes to what happens to this Optic team when they get off their comfort zone, which has typically been frequency over the last 2 weeks that we saw them play on the control. Their hardpoint have also come into a handful of run-ins where things were close. Now, you go over to E United, and the conversation, I think, just simply comes down to when you get to Game 5s, you figure E United can take at least 1 hard point and at least 1 search. Maybe not the control because they've been a little bit weak in control, but when you get to Game 5, can Optic beat E United? We saw what it looked like, you know, as far as how this matchup went in the first time they played search, and E United looked much better at London. I still think that if this team were to play up, or if these teams were to play up against one another, E United would be able to win that head-to-head in the immediate. I could very well be wrong. It's literally a dice toss at this point in time. Now the 100 Thieves conversation. How can I put E United below 100 Thieves when they beat 100 Thieves convincingly 3-0? My answer would be that this 100 Thieves team I think is just too good across every single mode routinely, and I think if these teams were to play 100 times, at the moment, I think 100 Thieves wins 90 of them. I just personally think, based on the fact that the respawn has been so strong for 100 Thieves, they're even started to look a little bit better in the search and destroy as the week finished. A 6-2, 6-1, and 6-3 win on the searches. That was back-to-back-to-back, and their control consistently is one of the best in the league. And then, obviously, their hardpoint, by far the best in the league. It's too difficult, I think, to continually beat 100 Thieves. If they do go up against each other again multiple times in a row, we saw this happen against Optic with 100 Thieves. Optic won the first one, 100 Thieves won the second, but also 100 Thieves at London had a 3-0 and a 3-1 versus E United. That came in the first round of the winners bracket and then in the grand finals. I just can't see a reason to move 100 Thieves just because of one game. Yes, E United did everything they had to do to find the 7-0 all the way through their week, similarly to Optic. And if you remember back, if you watched these videos before, I said if E United goes 7-0, I can't see a world why I wouldn't be able to switch E United back with Optic, because that was the whole reason. I put Optic ahead of E United after London simply because they went 7-0 in pools, or pardon me, in the Division A. E United just did the same thing. That was the rationale. Yes, there was a 3-0 for E United over 100 Thieves, but I think if these teams, again, like I mentioned, were to play 100 times, I think I see 100 Thieves winning it a vast majority of the time. So that's why I have things where they are. Let me know what you guys think. A long conversation there with a lot of our teams, but I want to give you guys some predictions as well as power rankings, so sorry for the longer video. We're so close to 10,000 subs. Would love you to hit that subscription button and to come back for all of our future videos. Coming up next, 4 probably videos individually talking about each of the pools, my predictions, and why I see certain teams finishing, where I see them finishing in the long scheme of CWL Anaheim. Also, stay tuned to my Twitter for some announcements coming up early parts of this week. Excited to see you guys around. Until next time, hope you have a good one. Keep holding it down as well. Later. Bye-bye.